It's a Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. It did indeed come out, and it came out, of course, after Radiant Dawn. Radiant Dawn was quite the ambitious game. It was quite the, it was quite the shower. Let's just say that. And obviously, going from, the grand, opulent story and general, character sort of storylines and operatic sort of, music and general feel to it, to going to Shadow Dragon. A game that, of course, remade the first Fire Emblem game, which was very basic, but still, this is, it is still kind of odd that this is the direction that they decided to go in terms of taking the series forward. And it's not a bad game. I find the gameplay to be quite fun, quite stellar, of course, with some of the new little mechanics, but still doesn't stop the fact that this game, its sort of existence is very, very confusing. Let's just say that. But even still, despite its relatively simple appearance and adding a few new chapters, the prologue, Marth's general feelings towards leaving his country, and of course the very odd Gaiden chapters that have Marth kill off his own units just to get some extra units and learn about their little lore and history. But this game still has a fair bit of weirdness, I guess, surrounding it. But either way, let's see what we can get out of it. So in terms of the general story and nature of this game, I think the biggest sort of addition, I guess, is the greater emphasis on, of course, Nina, the princess who wanted something else, but didn't end up getting that, and she got all sad and mournful in a sense. Of course, we do now have the context of BSFE or Arcania Saga, which are obviously chapters that happened before the events of the original Shadow Dragon, and they do give a little bit of insight into some of her dourness, I guess. Well, mainly the fact that she just wanted to die instead of taking responsibility for her country. After everything and everyone in Arcania Castle was seized, and she got a little bit fatalistic here in these chapters. But of course, Camus, he got onto her good side, let's just say that. And I guess there's clearly, very clearly a little flicker, a little spark of love that bloomed within Nina's heart, and ultimately it became a fatalistic sort of love, as of course Camus would have to help her escape, and of course he would have to go back to his home country and do whatever he wished to. But still, the fact that Nina now has her own demon game, and of course the fact that she does just generally have much better detailing in terms of expressions, and we get to see a little bit more of her like talking to Marth and whatnot. But Artemis and her curse, all of her descendants cannot truly wed the ones that they very much truly love, and of course that passes down to Nina, and how much she's aware of the curse and how much she may or may not try to curb it, who knows exactly. But either way, of course, again, that she she does as she says in her own words, she acts like a child, well, a spoiled one, one who wants to join her father, potentially in death, rather than face towards the ever broader horizon, as you would put it. And that obviously would cause a lot of little character problems. But she really is, I guess, desperate in a way. She's very depressed when Arcania Palace gets invaded in the first place, and then she finds true love in a very unexpected place, and it causes her a lot of grief knowing that she's not going to be able to get with Camus, and she's aware of Artemis's curse and whatnot, and she just acts very, very dour and overall very sad about it. And it is very clear, just looking at some of her artwork, of course, for Shadow Dragon, obviously, and Mystery of the Emblem, but more specifically for Fire Emblem Cypher, the only artwork she has in this card game is very, very dour looking indeed. It's not just Nina, of course, losing Camus, her first love, but of course also showing definite favoritism towards Marth, throughout, of course, Shadow Dragon, and even when she had to choose who to marry, of course, for political reasons, he probably would have wanted to choose Marth, but of course Shadeur was already engaged to him, and of course yeah, that caused Hardin to did end up marrying Nina to go on a very, 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 very conflicting thoughts. Let's just say that, and emotions that a Hardin has to endure and feel. That Nina clearly gave him a very cold shoulder, and that caused the war, of course, in Mystery of the Emblem. But it's unfortunate what happened with Nina and her feelings and all that. She could have at least tried to show Hardin a tad little morsel of genuine affection. That might have gone, a good ways, a good, long amount of ways. But we already saw the fatalistic nature of Nina in BSFE, so that wasn't really, I guess, set to be a thing. And yeah, Hardin, he thought himself, quite the manly man. He thought himself quite the, shrewd, person in terms of, missing out people's characters and their general emotions. But of course, I guess there was still a little bit of an incel, sort of thing going on with Hardin, and ultimately that caused him to, be corrupted by the Dark Sphere and, do a lot of very bad things in, warfare, and also enable some other, even worse things potentially with the whole General Lang situation. But of course, Nina herself, she can still be considered, an instigator of the war in Mystery of the Emblem, and in that, sort of possibility, that would mean that Marth, actually helped, one of the main villains in the next game, and Marth, obviously has, relatively good intentions, at least from his perspective, but directly aiding Nina, potentially be a very hazardous situation. And the time they got to know each other very well enough, at least during the War of Shadows, that caused even more separation from Nina and Hardin, and that caused a lot of suffering. But Nina, at the end of Mystery of the Emblem, if she does get brought back to her senses, thanks to Sirius Camus, the one she loves the most, and talks to him directly, even if he is currently under an alias. Ultimately, though, Camus, he is in fact alive, even though Nina thought Camus had died, and that's part of her despair in Mystery of the Emblem. But nope, he's still alive, and he's with another girl on another continent, and that is slightly ironic, I guess. But either way, of course, either way, regardless of how you feel about Nina, ultimately she can be considered an instigator of the war, and she made Hardin emotionally weak, and obviously the Dark Sphere, it is known to prey on emotionally weak people, and of course, being unlucky that Hardin happened to be, the emperor of the biggest continent on the country, or something like that, and hundreds of thousands of people got absolutely slaughtered. But either way, whether or not, it's fair to place any of the blame on Nina, let's look it through Shadeur Dragon to see if there's any, evidence of her being, a genuinely good person, or, having some real issues. So let's get into it. Nina first, converses with Marth in Chapter 6 after they take back Aurella's castle, and there, Nina, is very formal, upon meeting Marth for the first time, when she definitely doesn't really have to be. As she has, dealt with a lot of very strong emotional turmoil, but ultimately, she just kind of casually, gives Marth the Fire Emblem and doesn't gift it to Hardin, even though Hardin has protected her for, a fair bit of time, and, is sort of responsible for her being alive right now. But yeah, you can clearly see it with this artwork from New Mystery of the Emblem, that this is where, Hardin's seed of jealousy, began to spurn and durn its roots. But either way, of course, on to Chapter 11, when she talks in a significant way, of course, the fact that she casually drops the fact that some of her castle guards and family members were basically put through a stake, as you would put it. Your relatives just getting casually hung like swinging chandeliers. Yeah, I mean that is a disposition, all right. But either way, despite the fact that she kind of just drops this on Marth, Marth, he is as stone-faced as ever, and ultimately he just does what he has to do to eliminate the enemy. But Nina, I guess she did have to go through some really tough shit, so after 12x, if you're able to get there and obviously not kill Horus, then Horus, of course, he betrayed Arcania, just to protect his local people, and ultimately he's willing to accept a traitor's death. Once he is discovered by Marth and Nina, and is willing to be put down, by the sword, an honorable death, so to speak. But of course, Nina, who is supposed to carry out, the execution, for Horace being a traitor, she ultimately decides not to and gives him, a traitor's life instead of a coward's death, as you would put it. And well, obviously she sees that he is very repentful, but ultimately she realizes that I guess that death has absolutely no value in any capacity, and it's generally better to live a life of shame rather than whatever other alternative that death awaits for them. So yeah, Nina, she does show that she does have a certain level of kindness, at least, so that's cool. But of course, after chapter 13, shortly after saving Horace, obviously we have the Nina and Marth post-battle dialogue, where of course Marth is concerned, mainly because a local Grustian villager, they had to deal with a very strong flurry of Wuthering emotions coming at them very quickly. And obviously Marth, he had mostly been considered concerned with crushing all of his enemies and whatnot, who took his homeland from him. And he's been relatively straightforward in that goal. But of course Nina has to tell Marth to look beyond the average soldier and see them more than as just an enemy. And that is certainly a line of dialogue to give to Marth, who up until this point has been sort of belligerent, kind of. But either way, of course, obviously they go on to chapter 14 and deal with Gra. But still, I mean, it's certainly something that Nina gives Marth this a little bit of extra character development. But it is what it is. She does congratulate Marth, fairly coyly here in chapter 16, after they've almost infiltrated the castle. But of course then they do infiltrate the castle, and of course Nina congratulates Marth again, being very, very kind to him, about his very vivid accomplishments of seizing castles. But either way, Nina, she does talk a little bit in 18 and 19, but of course chapter 20, what we're here for, of course, Camus the Sable. Obviously Marth and friends go to clash with Camus, but not before Nina spills the beans on this whole little saga. And she tells Marth about how much she truly grew a very unique feeling for him, and that caused many spouts, beanstalks of turmoil for Nina. But of course, either way, though, of course, there's nothing to be done. Camus continued to fight, and Marth, potentially, he could have avoided giving chase to Camus and, dogging him down, as you would say. But obviously, Marth didn't want to take the risk of, obviously, one of the continent's finest warriors being at his back in a potential pincer attack. So he decided to ultimately, take what he could, on his little kebab here. But suffice it to say, there is a slight level of, traumatization from Nina as hearing all this stuff and, having to endure all of it, but also the fact that, at first she initially hated Camus, but obviously, got to know him over time. And obviously, in different circumstances years ago, Nina would have been, completely fine with murdering Camus, for the sake of, for, the safety of her family and country. But obviously now in this situation, it's a whole lot of whiplash, let's just put it that way. But of course, she does finally, I guess, let it all out, at the end of the chapter. And obviously she's very sad, but of course, she had a little bit of foresight. She kind of saw this coming regardless. But maybe she should have done more to stop Marth from killing Camus. But it is what it is, and this is the last bit of dialogue that we get from Nina in this game, at least until the epilogue. And obviously it does leave on a very somber note, but of course she is at least, she gives off the front of being very happy, at least in the epilogue, as happy as she can be, at least. And she does vow to protect her people over, doing anything selfish with her feelings or stuff like that. But either way, of course, as you well know, the mystery of the emblem happens, and she doesn't exactly keep her promise. Obviously, she wasn't super aware of the dark sphere and what it could do to Hardin, but still, being this cold towards Hardin, it obviously, created, much more of a ripple effect than, she would like to have admitted. But either way, let's look at Marth and see what, extra little, characterization he has in this game. He's obviously quite important alongside Nina, but Marth, of course, as we see in the prologue, he obviously views himself as a craven for, leaving his homeland, and obviously, the enemy forces, alighted onto his castle, and, very, very quickly, very, very suddenly, it was like, a large, wildfire. It suddenly just, came and, took his home, just like that. So obviously, there's a little bit of shock value there, and it's understandable why, he would have a decent resentment towards Dolar and whatnot, and the other surrounding nations. But Marth, well, obviously, as you see here in chapter 13, he says that, well, he held a lot of hatred in his heart for the people, the enemy nations that, forced, his family out of his homeland and whatnot, and, obviously, of course, Grust, and specifically Gra, he mostly held, only hatred in his heart for those types of nations. And obviously, that is not necessarily something you would want in a very supreme leader, but of course Marth at least does acknowledge that, maybe he's been, I guess, a little bit ignorant of, the war situation that's going on right now. But of course, with this little, line of dialogue with Nina, having Marth realize that he needs to look, beyond, just the people that he's fighting, and maybe appreciate a bigger picture that's going on here. Ultimately, though, it doesn't end up amounting to much, as Marth, fundamentally through the gameplay, the enemy is the enemy, and he has to defeat them, no matter what. So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's not exactly something. It's kind of an odd, situation, of course, because war is still war, and ultimately, Dolar and the Alliance, they're still putting his people under, intense, sort of slavery if they're not killing them, outright, of course. And obviously, you can't solve all the moral, quandaries of war, just by sitting on the sidelines. But you kind of get the point that Marth, obviously, already functions in a gray area in terms of morality, a very extreme gray area, but still, of course, the fact that, Marth, he's very generic, I guess you could say that, he's not exactly someone, who is very insightful or, has a ton of wisdom in regards to politics and, the way that the world works. And of course, from his perspective, the dragons just, up and invaded, the human realm, and, obviously they caused a lot of terror, and, obviously Marth is, there to get rid of that terror. So, he doesn't have the wherewithal to understand the greater conflict between, dragons and, humans and whatnot, and, why dragons, do what they do and stuff like that. It's all just, a simple act of warfare to defend his people and his homeland, which is very, very good for a leader. But, again, at the same time, he doesn't exactly have the greatest perspective in the world, and of course, as you mentioned before, there is the possibility that he helped aid Artemis's curse, as you would put it, and he helped, possibly cause the war of heroes in, of course, New Mystery of the Emblem. But in chapter 23, we do see that Marth has a little bit of a sense of humor here, just a very small amount of it, but, that does show a slight inch of humanity, as you could put it, so that's pretty cool to have in a leader. But of course, I think it's most interesting in the epilogue, where Marth has a love of Sita, of course, but obviously he's a little bit awkward about it. But obviously Nina tells Marth to go up and talk to her in this epilogue, and Marth is extraordinarily awkward and not willing to be super upfront about his feelings, as you would put it. But of course, he does express them in his own unique way, deriving great strength from being in the general crosshairs of Sita's very unique gaze, let's just put it that way. And luckily Sita knows what Marth is talking about and doesn't make him spell out his feelings to her, and they quietly hush away together. But Of course, in the possibility that Sita dies during the events of this game, we do get different dialogue, with Nina and Marth talking about Artemis's curse and, potentially the fact that both Artemis, of course, being the descendant of Nina, but of course Henri, the descendant of Marth, obviously those two wanted to love each other, but they obviously couldn't due to the curse of the Fire Emblem, which maybe supposedly was, caused by the original founder of Arcania, which was Adra, who basically conquered the continent and stole, legendary weapons along with the Binding Shield, and of course the Binding Shield would go on to be the Fire Emblem, but the curse of the Fire Emblem, Artemis's curse, is related to the fact that, of course, Adra, conquered and, subjugated, most of, the entire continent for himself, and obviously the curse stems from that, and yeah, that is, certainly a thing, I guess, alright, but, whether or not you believe in, ghosts and other types of curses that, come back to haunt the people, the conquistadors, the people who, tormented, the native people or the native land people or whatever you want to call it, obviously there is still a haunting aspect to, any sort of, conquistador or whatnot, and of course, Marth, obviously he wants to, defend and save his homeland in this game, but at the same time, of course, he is basically, subjugating a continent and, killing tons of people, and, well, whether or not, Marth is truly that much different from Adra, or, what exactly separates Marth, from one of these conquistadors, that comes down to Marth's humanity and, his love life as well, of course. And if Sita's dead and he doesn't have anyone who he greatly loves, then yeah, that leads to a, let's just say that leads to a very cold world. The Fire Emblem, it's meant to, sort of be a representation of love and, the flames that surround it, but of course, if the wielder of the Fire Emblem, Marth, he doesn't have any love, then I guess, things just kind of grow cold. And, yeah, that is obviously, meant to be, sort of chilling in a way, because, if love, just fades and goes away and no one's around to really know about it, then, yeah, that's a pretty bad thing. And, of course, the final theme that we hear in this game at the very end is, of course, Unspoken Feelings, which is just a rendition of Nina's theme. And obviously Nina, of course, she loves Camus very, very deeply, but she doesn't end up, showing, that, passion and love to Camus, before he dies, and, that causes her a lot of turmoil, and it leads to this incredibly sad song, but, yeah, she probably should have, at least bared her heart out to Camus a little bit more, but, it is what it is, and, obviously, if, there isn't enough love to be spread around into the world, then, potentially very disastrous situations like this can occur. But either way, of course, that's pretty much the end of the game in terms of adding any important, sort of lore. Of course, there's a lot of other little, interesting, bits of dialogue and whatnot, and a big takeaway, Marth is very average in terms of, main characters and lords and whatnot, but ultimately, he goes down in the history books. He's the face of the franchise. He's the political figurehead of the entire series, mostly because the people around him, propped him up and gave him the legend, that would go on to live for countless ages. And of course, obviously everyone knows the Hero King, but, it is still interesting the fact that, yeah, by all general means, he is relatively unexceptional, and at the start of Shadeur Dragon, he is wildly incompetent, and obviously the guidance chapters are based around him getting his units killed off, so, I mean, yeah, that is certainly something, though, yeah, there's not much else to say about that, but still it is interesting. I guess there's also one more thing to note, obviously the whole forbidden love thing with Camus and Nina and whatnot. There is a little bit of a parallel with another Intelligent Systems game, of course, being Super Paper Mario, which did come out at around a similar time Obviously, that game, takes that concept and explores it to a much greater extent, but, it is still an interesting coincidence to say the least. But